questions. I know that we're running a little late, and thank you for your patience. I'm just going to quickly introduce our panel, and then I'll hand it over to Better for facilitation. So we have Amit, who is a writer and podcaster, and he's based here in Mumbai. Next, we have Avantika, who's been a broadcast journalist with over 20 years of experience. Avantika was also part of the very first cohort in Delhi, so she's the 2011 alumni. She's a fitness enthusiast and she absolutely loves spending time with her kids. Next, we have Gitanjali. Gitanjali started Katha with the mission of turning brothels into classrooms. It's been shaped by experience, passion, and professional change makers, and the organization holds the confidence of many both inside and outside the community and stands synonymous with love, trust, and diversity to end forced sex trade. And finally, I tell you, the room would know better. I'm going to hand it off to her for facilitation. She is OG cohort Anjol 2009 alumni, Bombay City Director, and alumni Akanksha. Okay, thank you, Arushi. So welcome everyone, very excited, and I know for anyone who follows podcasts, and I know many people already know Amit. I could hear snaps before even the introduction started, but seen and unseen for those who follow podcasts, and everything is everything on YouTube. Even Avantika, I remember when she joined the fellowship, like everyone was like semi-starstruck at that time, like, oh, news anchor in the fellowship, and we would talk about what that means for our work. And I know there's been so many people inspired by Gitanjali, so I feel a personal connection in some way with everyone. So we have a very interesting topic, raise your voice with love. I think everyone in the audience also has experience with this, so we'll try and keep it free-flowing and interactive. But let's start off with the first question. I think all of you in your work are raising your voice for different things in different ways. So maybe if you could start off just by telling us, what does this phrase, raise your voice with love, mean for each one of you, and what might have shaped that? Anyone who wants to get started?
Okay, I can start since I happen to be holding the mic as well. I was thinking about what it would mean to raise your voice with love. And I found that, the last word love can be very sort of fuzzy and can mean different things to many people. How do you define it? So I would rather say that for me, what it would mean is raise your voice with understanding, right? And this is important because what has happened in modern times is our discourse has gotten deeply polarized, right? And social media has a part to play on this. What typically happens is you join a social media platform, you find a tribe of some sort you're familiar with, and then you just want to raise your status within that tribe. And therefore, you get shriller and shriller. You attack people on the other side, always people, never arguments. You attack people on your own side for not being pure enough, and you break down all arguments into stark binaries. And what then happens is that if someone else is wrong according to you, they are not just wrong, they are evil, they are bad people, right? And everything gets flattened out in that way. Now, I don't believe that everyone is like that. That's a vocal minority. So a lot of what you hear in the discourse is from this vocal minority. But there is a silent majority out there which is not like that, which understands that most things are complicated. You can't, always rush to judgment. And so there is that silent majority out there. But there is this impression among media because of the vocal minority that what sells, what works as effective clickbait, what will get you eyeballs and engagement is the kind of shallow posturing, the empty virtue signaling, and always attacking people on the other side. And I think that's a mistake the media makes, because when you think about engagement in those terms, I think it's fundamentally wrong, because what I have come to realize over a period of time is that there are really two kinds of engagement. One is a shallow engagement where you're scrolling, swiping, you're looking at headlines, you're not thinking deep about anything. And the other is a much deeper engagement where you really want to figure out what's going on. Why are people doing what they're doing? Why is the way the world the way it is? And all of these extreme noises cater to the shallow engagement types. But if you really want to make a difference in the world, you have to get past the judgment. You have to understand that actions may be bad or good, but people are complicated. And therefore it's important that whenever you address someone that you don't agree with or someone whose mind you're trying to change, you need to address them with understanding, with that mutual respect that this is a human being like me. We are all deeply complicated. And I'm quite happy to consider that my definition of love, that when you speak to someone, speak to them in good faith. You raise your voice against some injustice, talk about that injustice, why it is an injustice, talk about the problem, but demonizing a certain class of people or painting in strokes that are too broad, I think is a problem with our modern discourse. And that's what I've kind of realized through all these years.
Would you want to go? So, I mean, I would second a lot of things that my friend and Amit has said. Being in journalism and being a news presenter and a political reporter for the last 20 years has been challenging. Journalism has changed a lot since I started in 2003. I had launched Headlines Today with the India Today group, and a lot has changed. And as you rightly said, in this era of fake news, clickbait journalism, talk about journalistic independence being scrutinized and being controlled. I think raising your voice with love, when they told me about this, is very difficult for a reporter and for a journalist in the present circumstances, and very challenging. I genuinely believe it should be raising your voice to make an impact, and especially for a woman journalist, for a lady. And I started out very young, and as you grow in years and wisdom, and I think for me, a lot changed when I became a mother. I became a lot more empathetic to a certain news, a story. I started out as a crime reporter. I have spent a lot of time in morgues, and I was very detached from a story. And I remember for me, the turning point came during these Syrians when they were making their way out, and the news of this little child, Aylan Kurdi, whose listless body was found on a beach. I think for me, that was a turning point. And I feel raising your voice with love in today's time will not have the desired impact as you would like to. And I want to be very realistic about things, because I'm there on the ground, dealing with politicians, dealing with newsmakers, dealing with policymakers. I think one has to be very practical and pragmatic. I think probably being more assertive and being firm about what you want is what works for me. So for me, raising your voice with love doesn't even happen with my children. I do raise my voice with love, with empathy, but love, the definition of love can be very different and varying for different people. So I mean, if you mean mollycoddling and just being all lalla pucci जैसे कहते हैं, वो तो नहीं होता है. आप जब election cover करने जाते हो, जब आपको you have to be on the ground, आप जब villagers के साथ बैठकर आपको बात करनी होती है, उनके demands क्या है, उनकी ख्वाहिशें, उनके needs क्या है, you have to be very forceful, and you have to get into the skin of things, as you rightly said. You just have to. And that's how, at least I can proudly say, in my years of reportage, I have endeavored and I have tried my best to put both the sides, because that's what we were taught. To put and to give a voice to the voiceless, and to put all sides of the story out there and be as objective. Credibility can be questioned. One can interpret a particular news piece according to their ideology, and I fully respect that as well. But I truly believe that one has to raise your voice with firmness and assertion, like being very strong about it.
Thank you.
Oh.
Wow. Both the people are coming from the media and out there. Surprisingly, I was also from media. I did my journalism, but then I realized that it's too many cameras, and maybe that's not for me, because for me, something else was calling. And I think then I felt belonged to this road, which everybody felt that love doesn't exist, which is a red light area. And every time I ask somebody, have you been to a brothel? And what do you think a brothel looks like? And they all have terms like violence, anger, aggression, murder. pain. But for me, a red light area is street of love. We call it Pyar Ka Mohalla because so for me, actually, red light area has taught me a very different meaning of love. Because when I went there, there were clients, there were drunk men, there were people who would want to take you in the room and pay 200 rupees for you and then beat you up and hurt you. But there were mothers, whom we call sex workers, who are out there to protect you all the time. And yesterday I was with one of the friends and he shared this incident. He said that in 2013 I went with Gitanjali to one of the brothels to make election cards. And he said I was just with her. We were filling the forms. I didn't even remember that incident. And he said this one client came towards her and he was drunk. So he came towards me and he said, Tere saath jaunga types. And the lady, the owner, she picked him up from his neck and he said, don't even dare to look at her. I don't remember this incident. But then he said that this is the relationship which you have been able to build. Sometimes when you're inside, you don't know what you're doing, right? But from somebody who comes from outside, and I think this has only been possible because of the word love. And after my fellowship, I'm not a TFI fellow, I'm a Gandhi fellow. So after my fellowship, I always felt that I am not a student who is intellectual. I'm not a person who knows a lot of strategies. In fact, I didn't even know what is the meaning of entrepreneurship. I used to ask my fellows, कि क्या बोलते रहते हो तुम्हें entrepreneur बनना है? So I just thought that what I have was that I can be honest and I can create that safe space for the people who are meeting me. And that's what I can offer in the brothel because that's what I felt is missing. Because all the organizations are already working there. They're giving the stuff. They're getting their medical tests done. Whatever they feel is important. But what missing was love, which I thought that I can fill it. And yes, for me, the journey of love has been evolving. You rightly said that there are instances when you see crime happening in front of you and then you can't be, you can't say, oh, chhod do. I mean, that's not the voice. And when you are on the road, especially we do our night walks at 1 or 2. So every time I see that my body language changes when I'm on the road. But that love is still there. So I think love is a feeling for me. It is that warmth which keeps me going. It is that confidence which tells me that, boss, this is it. This can change the world. And yes, it's been 14 years on GB Road now. And I feel that, yeah, love is doing a lot. So.
Thank you, and I love that love has had so many different meanings here, and I think Avantika and me were briefly chatting about it earlier as well. And I know when love was introduced as a core value in Teach for India, it wasn't there from the start. There was a lot of discomfort then also because each one of us have our own understanding of what love is, and it's like I would love. And so I think it's just so fascinating. I think you spoke about understanding, you spoke about firmness, you spoke about like taking protection and taking action, and they may not fall in the traditional way of what we understand of love, but I think that's what we're trying to engage with, especially today when we're talking about raising our voice. It is understanding how do we all interpret love in the context of raising our voice. So maybe I know some personal examples came up, but maybe if you could each talk about a time where you were raising your voice in whatever context, could be work, could be social media, could be home, society, and you were faced with some resistance, and how did you sort of approach it? What did you do? Anyone wants to?
So I was thinking about that, and throughout my journey as a political correspondent, and journalists become very cynical because we are exposed to a lot of things and we see a lot of things that we don't always, or we have the bandwidth to put it out there in a 24-hour news cycle. And especially when you're on the ground, especially when you're covering a lot of things, and my dear friend Shashank is here, when you're out there in villages, when you're working with so many people, different stakeholders, you see just so much out there which makes you cynical. It does put you in a very dark space. And I'll be brutally honest about it. And I have been through those instances in my life, in my reporting career. But I think for me, where raising your voice with love happened was uh, very surprisingly during my tenure as a TFI fellow. It was the first time that I went into the school, and I was shocked because I had taken a break from journalism. I had finished 13 years when I decided to step back and join TFI, which was a huge decision on my part. And then I walked into this classroom, uh, being all idealistic that I'm going to change things around. And I started with the endeavor of, how Shaheen says, excellence. And I said, okay, this is going to be a piece of cake for me with after all that I've experienced. And I taught these kids the initial few days. They were in grade 2, and we had to reteach them a lot of things like alphabets. We were told you have to reteach all of that phonetically. And so we were following the book as we were told and as we were taught. And when I did that for the first 2 months, I remember walking down. It was a low-income private school in Sangam Vihar, feeling very proud about myself, that what I'm achieving. And I saw there were easily about 50 women standing waiting for me. And the teacher of that school, 2 teachers of that school were standing there and saying, "Ye aapse milne aayi hai sari." And I was just amazed with the size of these women. I mean, just the number of them. And again, me being, I don't know, I would say a bit vain or overconfident, thinking that I'm doing a great job, they were there abusing me and just throwing brickbats at me and accusing me of, degrading their children and telling me that they're in grade 2 and you're teaching them ABC and you've wasted all our hard-earned money. I can never forget that moment in my life. And for once, I had to raise my voice with love. There was no other way to handle that situation. I had to placate them. I had to explain it to them. They were very, very cynical. They didn't believe me. And I said, you give me 6 months. You give me 6 months. And I can say with utmost pride, by 2013, my children were reading the unabridged version of Oliver Twist.
Wow.
But I had to handle that situation with love. And all my years of anger and shouting and getting my point across with politicians, with newsmakers, everything failed. So yeah, I mean, there are circumstances where love is the only way to go with.
Okay, I'll go next. So I haven't been an activist of any sort. I haven't, done what these 2 guys have and gone out and tried to change things. I've mainly been a writer and a thinker for the last sort of 30 years. But my brief thought is that all the pushback that I have ever received has come on social media, because social media is incredibly shallow, because how much can you do in 140 characters or 280 characters? And because of the incentives of the game I spoke about earlier, everyone's looking for something to attack. And the thing to note is that whenever you pass judgment on someone else, it is an act of ego. You're basically saying, I am either more virtuous than you, or I am more knowledgeable than you, or I am both. And the core reason for this is that it is dehumanized. On social media, it is a handle at the other end. It is not an actual human being. Through the many conversations I've had on my podcast, one distinction that I have come to think of is the distinction between the abstract and the concrete. I did an episode once with Aanchal Malhotra, who did this great book on partition memories, and she was saying how she was chatting with a Hindu family in Karachi which had crossed over during partition. They had suffered terribly, and they were telling her about what they went through. And at one point, the lady of the family is saying things like, Hindus aise hai, Hindus waise hai, Hindus aise hai. Then she realizes Aanchal is sitting there, and she says, tum nahi beti, tum achhi ho. Right? And to me, it's a distinction between the abstract and the concrete, that in the abstract, when you look at concepts like nationalism and the other and purity and whatever, it's easy to hate other people. It is far harder to do that when you are actually with them and when you're engaging with them in a concrete sense. And to me, I think a definition of love also comes from there. Like Iris Murdoch once said, that love is a terrible realization that something other than oneself is real. right? Because we live in this main character syndrome where I am the main character in my play. All of you are instrumental to me, or there for my amusement or to make me feel a particular way. And this is our default mode. And it takes a great act of intentionality to come out of this and look at the other person as a person. And this is why I was, I really admire what Gitanjali's done, because this is the exact thing she spoke about doing when she went to these places. That for her, very obviously, these women were not a social cause for you. They were not a box that you tick ki, haan, main ye kar rahi hu to feel good about myself. You're actually engaging with them as people. And that's all. Otherwise, love ko to we can give it all kinds of fancy meanings and all of that. But I think just learning to engage with other people as actual human beings, that is where love begins and ends.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, actually. I don't know, but yeah, again, love is sometimes self and love is others. So, for me, one incident, actually, there are a lot of stories. 14 साल में and the organization name is Katkatha, that means stories, कथाएं. तो कथाएं बहुत बहुत कहानियां हैं, लेकिन जब स्पॉटलाइट पे डालते हैं तो कहानी याद नहीं आती है. And when Avantika was sharing, I said, oh yes, there was a point where all the women also did the same thing to me, and then Katkatha happened. As a result of that, Katkatha happened. But there's one incident which is very close to me. So this brothel from where I started my journey, this woman is the owner of that brothel. Everybody calls her Bhua. Because there is this village in our country in which girls do not have any other option. They have to get into sex trade, or they get married at the age of 13 or 14. That's the only options which a girl has. And the boys, they have to be the pimps for their sisters and for their mothers. So this Bhua is also one of the girls from that village. So she has done her part as a sex worker, but now she's also become a madam, and she's running this one brothel, and her brother traffics girls, and her brother marries other girls from other culture, and then they bring that girl into their brothel, and then they force them to do the trade. So as an act, if you hear about it, you would really want to hate these people, right? Like, मतलब ये कौन सी भुआ है, एक मौका मिले, and I mean, you would just want to. I mean, sometimes if you go that crazy, you want to murder such people, right? And you want to say, Ki, I want to wipe out this thing. So this Bhua, and there was this one lady in that brothel. Her name is Kajal, and Kajal Didi always wanted to study. So I went to her and I said, "Padhoge? मैं आपके पास ही आके पढ़ाऊंगी." And she said, "Bhua मानेगी नहीं." So I went to Bhua and she said, "यहाँ पढ़ाई तो बात ही मत करियो. यहाँ किताबें आ ही नहीं सकती हैं." So I said, okay, do not allow any women, but can you allow the women's son? His name is Kunal. And she's like, पढ़ाई यहाँ का कोई बच्चा नहीं कर सकता है. और मैं तेरे को लिख के गारंटी देती हूँ कि यहाँ का पूरे जीबी रोड का, मतलब सिर्फ मेरे रूम का नहीं, पूरे जीबी रोड में कोई ऐसा लड़का या लड़की नहीं है जो पढ़ाई करेंगे. But somehow Kajal Didi was very convinced कि Kunal will study. And she started sending Kunal to me. And Bhua got to know one time कि कुणाल झूठ बोल के नीचे जा रहा है, बट ही इज एक्चुअली गोइंग टू कटकथा. सो बुआ कॉल्ड मी, और मुझे बहुत सुनाया उन्होंने. एंड शी सेड अगर कुणाल, एंड देन शी चैलेंज्ड मी एंड शी सेड अगर कुणाल ने पढ़ लिया तो मेरा नाम बदल दियो. आई सेड तो ठीक है, तो आने तो दोगे ना उसको. एंड शी लाइक हाँ ठीक है, तेरे को मैं देती हूँ जितना समय तुझे चाहिए. And I remember there was this one day when Kunal started going to an academy because he was very much into dancing. और हम लोग सब उसकी academy में उसको dance करते हुए देखने गए. And Bhua also came, which was unbelievable for me. And she's sitting and Kunal danced and then he was awarded with a trophy. और मैं धीरे से पीछे बुआ की चेयर पे गई. ऐसे नया नाम क्या रखूं? And she looked at me. So I think such incidents always gives you that hope कि चलते चलो, things will happen on its own. So बुआ अभी भी नहीं पढ़ती है, but अब उनके brothel से कोई लड़की sex work में नहीं जाती है. So and she's not doing it openly because otherwise उनको उनके गांव से निकाल दिया जाएगा. But she ensures that every girl in her village, in her brothel, she's studying. So yeah, that's.
Actually, that's commendable. I mean, one thing that she said, itna dekhkar, not to feel anger and just be devoted with the person who's committed is, I think, extraordinary. I have felt anger. I've spent so much time with cops, small girls, and I've wondered what to do because I had to file a story, and with absolute detachment, no feelings. अरे इसका तो rape हुआ है. I have two daughters. I've covered those stories. I didn't left feeling love. I left feeling a lot of anger in me and a lot of hatred. So kudos to you, really.
No, I do feel that. It's not that love is the only emotion which exists.
Yeah.
So I have been through a lot in my life also, but I'm so grateful to the people around. And before coming here, by the way, that could be a joke, but before coming here, I had my husband. I said, raise your voice with love. He said, please tell them that your voice is, you don't raise your voice with love, only with your husband.
Let's not go down that. Yeah. The husband story is another session.
Yeah, so, you always have that self also where, but there is a place where you don't have an option. If you shout or अगर आप चिल्लाओगे तो उनको एक second लगेगा. I mean, to just wipe you out. So I think that is love also, but that is
Tactical.
tactical also. Strategy also.
Strategic.
So actually, if we double click on this theme, right, I think all of us in different forms, right, some as, very intense cases that maybe both of you come across when you're going for reporting or in your work, which immediately brings out a certain emotion, or sometimes on social media, right, it becomes like somebody who knows nothing of what you're doing, what you meant, what you said is like suddenly going on a rant. I think it just instantly brings out a lot of negative emotions, right? And I'm just curious to understand, how do each of you find your ways to channel that? And what do you choose to do, right? Do you choose to ignore? Do you choose to respond? If you choose to respond, do you respond with the same level of firmness as has come? Do you respond with love, or whatever our version of that is? But how do you do that internal processing in these moments where internally you're feeling something negative?
So my initial response when I would get trolled on social media would always be to either react with anger, because your initial response is always anger, right? That's reflexive. That person doesn't even understand and they're just randomly taking something out of context and you react with anger. But over time I found that, again, the word tactical or strategic rather in this case comes in, that it really doesn't help. On social media, as no one's engaging in good faith, it doesn't help. So what I have simply stopped is, while once upon a time my feed was pretty political, I just stopped putting anything political up there. I link to the podcast and the shows that I do, and that's pretty much it. Because there is simply no point, and that's my strategic decision for social media, that there will never be a conversation in good faith. There is no point. But when I speak of my podcasts, and I think all the listeners who happen to be here will agree, it's the opposite audience. Right, far from rushing to judgment, it's just the opposite. They want to know more. They want to kind of, engage well, and that's what they want to do. So therefore, I just focus on that. So that's part one of my answer. That it depends on what is the platform. There are places where you've built that trust and you can say whatever, and there are spaces where that is simply, not possible. And the other part of it is that normatively, through the years, the approach that I have adopted for myself in my life is that I am process oriented and not goal oriented. Too many years go by. Like one of my favorite quotes is by Annie Dillard, where she says, "How you spend your days is how you spend your lives." So, for too much of my life driven by male ego and competitiveness, I wanted to achieve this, I wanted to achieve that. And I would think of the future, and every day would be like a waiting room for a glorious future, right? And that approach is toxic and only leads to unhappiness. And I figured that out. And therefore, I process on what I am doing on each particular day, the processes I follow for my work. And from that, what directly flows is that if I am writing about something, if I am raising my voice, if I am whatever, I don't care about the outcome. I can't control the outcome. I care about my work. Am I doing the right thing in a given moment? And of course, it has to be strategic, that I need to know what is the platform. Can I say this here? Should I fight back here? Should I not fight back here? But having said that, my dharma is to keep on thinking and to keep on saying what I'm saying. And you cannot control the outcome. And the moment you internalize that, then you can become dispassionate and the anger doesn't come.
Okay. Mine fluctuates quite a bit because in a newsroom, it's a high octane environment. I have to take breakneck decisions on the second, and especially when I have long bulletins, long reporting assignments, I don't have the luxury of effectively and then leave it at that. Again, as you said, you can only do that much, and there's no other way to it. But when you get into that expectation of proving your point right, that's a big one. That's like hitting your head on the wall, because the internet is a beast. It's a disruptor even in our industry. There's just so much out there, and for us journalists to sift through the news, and for me, I'm very particular what goes out in my bulletin, and I want to have all sides. And yes, I know that there is a lot of talk about how press freedom is curtailed. There are restrictions. I'm very lucky and I feel very privileged. In the last 20 years, at least, I have not had senior editors who have controlled me in any way. And they have allowed me the way, because there's a way. I don't have to be angry and acrimonious and hold you by your throat to get the point of view. I'm still called a smiling anchor. Like through the biggest, when the surgical strikes happened, I still remember I broke the story. I was on air for 4 hours and it was massive. But the next day, I was removed from the roster and there was a very senior male anchor who was put there. And I went up to my boss and I said, why? I mean, I broke this story. It's my story. So, well, I was not full of love at that time. But I was told, नहीं, आपका बड़ा sweet चेहरा है. अमांतिका जी, आपका बड़ा sweet smiling चेहरा है, वो impact नहीं आएगा. So now, do I have to fight that battle? Do I need to? You have to figure out all those things. So yeah, you had punching guys and fire and all the theatrics. So you have to just play it by the ear and see how it goes.
Yeah.
That's my experience. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, for me also, it's like, it's always a different way how I react. It's surprising for me as well. So there's been this incident in one of the brothels. I took my bhabi. It was the first time that she came with me, and my brother, my elder brother, who's 10 years older to me. So I always say ki, do papa, teen. I have 2 brothers. And he's always protective. Like brothers को वो लगता ही है कि हमारी जिम्मेदारी है बहन को protect करना. But in the brothel, it became my जिम्मेदारी to protect my brother, because he was new in that space. So हम चल रहे हैं और सबसे आगे भैया हैं, फिर one of my staff and then bhabhi, and then I was there. And these young guys from college, and this was one of the most popular brothel, जहाँ पे बहुत ज़्यादा भीड़ रहती है हर वक्त. So these guys from the college, when they enter into the brothel, they don't care whether you're from an NGO or you're a teacher or whatever. They are paying there. So if you're a girl and you're standing there, you have to have a cost to it, right? You have to have an amount of money written on you कि इतने का मेरे को आप ले सकते हो. So they just came and they grabbed me from behind. अब उस moment पे my whole self was that भाभी को कोई touch ना कर दे, and I'm like protecting, and this guy just came and I उस टाइम पे कोई प्यार मोहब्बत नहीं हुआ. मतलब मैं पीछे मुड़ी and I just slapped that guy on his face. And then later I realized, oh shit, मैंने क्या कर दिया. I just tell all my team members or volunteers to not to react when you are in GB Road, because you don't know who is carrying what. They're carrying weapons, they're carrying guns, they're carrying knives. There are all sort of men who comes there. They're drunk, they can just harm you, they're carrying blades. So I always tell my staff to be alert when you're in the brothel. But it just came instantly, and my brother looked at me and तूने थप्पड़ मारा? So I said, Bhaiya, sorry, ignore, let's go. And I looked at them and I said, don't dare to follow us, and don't. And they were young boys, so they understood. They're from college. I think the first time in DU, when you're a new entry, you want to come to a brothel and explore. So I think they were those. But yes, there are instances. And a bit recently, in fact, on this Diwali, so we do light a diya in a brothel campaign. And this young girl of mine, she's into fighting. Her mother lives with us in our home, which we have created for the women who wants to leave GB Road. So she's learning fighting. And उसको कुछ लड़कों ने comment करा. और वो बहुत गुस्से में मेरे पास आई to my brothel where I was, and she's like, मैम आज मुझे बस रोक लिया है, वरना मैं आज उसको मार देती. And my first response was कि मार देती. रुकी क्यों? But then the other Gitanjali was like, nahi beta, we are here and we have to be very, very mindful and very, very careful. So you cannot. But it's not कि पहले emotion प्यार ही आता है. पहला emotion, like you rightly said,
it's anger.
first you react and then you see, oh, I reacted. Now let's see. But yes, those episodes are now, as you say, age matters a lot. So before episodes come ho rahe hain, you start to respond first and then you react. You don't react, but yes, it is always a mixture of how you see the thing at that moment and how you react to it.
Venil, why don't you say something on this subject?
Yeah, that's
You've
an
also been
idea.
so active for so many years.
Yeah, I was just going to also open it out to everyone. I feel like just all of the experiences and the wisdom, at least for me, I'm just like processing and so excited with it. But I mean, I agree with the love. I feel like because we all understand it in different ways, like I think even initially I had a reaction to, but if there's an injustice happening, like I don't respond immediately in that moment with love. But I think it came back to being practical, right? Saying if my eventual goal and why I'm doing this eventually is to change that reaction of mine coming out in anger is not going to change that. It's just going to increase it further. And I think just that understanding of being committed or connected to that end goal and not that smaller battle, I think over time has also led me to say, let me drop a few, like similar. Like I would do a lot of political posts on social media pre a certain era, and then I've stopped after a certain era. So because I'm like, this is not worth it. Nobody's getting convinced.
Yeah.
The people who are already convinced, we are going back and forth in comments, attacking some other people. So yeah, I think just again, very similar to you, anchoring on the larger purpose and saying that's where I want to get to, and then I'll operate in that way without being disrespectful and just maybe disconnecting when I need to. I think when it's in person, it's very different, like you said, right? It's just easy to sit down and say, okay, why did you say that? Or you said that, I felt hurt. There are also hard conversations, which I think in Teach for India we were taught. We were taught to say, when you get angry with someone, don't just stop talking. How do you sit down and saying, I felt a certain way? How do you understand that you felt a certain way doesn't mean that person intended it for you to feel that way? So how do you articulate also, my anger in a way of saying, this is my feeling and I take responsibility for it, but I do want you to know that I felt that way. So I think just some of that training also really helped in having better conversations with people as opposed to saying, you said this and you couldn't have said it. So I think that's been really helpful for me. I'd love to open it to people, questions. Yeah. I don't know if you need the mic for questions. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask that being at the entrepreneur position, while you're running an organization, how to show love and then when to show love? That is my question, because sometimes you lose the patience. You don't have that patience, like, okay, one time excuse, second time excuse, third time excuse. Still, when you can actually deal excuses with love. So that's my question to all of you. How do you do it?
No, you go for it.
So actually this happens a lot. Like, in fact, right now I'm struggling with one of my girls. She's been with me since she was 9. Now she's 21 and she recently entered Azim Premji. और अभी वो मुझे वहाँ से messages कर रही है and she's just testing my patience day in, day night. कि मतलब रात को उसका last message, आप हो कहाँ? Said, I'm in Mumbai. Okay, thank you. So it is that, but there was one person who I respect a lot in my life, and I was going through this one stage where I was like, मैं मना करने वाली हूँ उन बच्चों को कि बस अभी तुम्हारा हो गया, enough. And then she said, that's not your job. You committed to always receive them with open arms. So वो बहुत बार तुम्हें गाली देके चले जाएंगे. That is not in your control. What is in your control is that when they're coming back, they're finding you in the same spot with the same love. Can you do that? And if you can do that, then continue on this journey. And if you cannot, then take a break. Nobody has forced you, right? Nobody has come to my home and they said, okay, Gitanjali, now it's your responsibility to start Katkata. That was my way of having this life. So she said, but this is one thing which you have to always practice. And I think it is difficult at many stages. मैं तो बहुत चिल्लाती हूँ, चीखती हूँ. बहुत सारी दीदियों को बहुत सुनाव भी देती हूँ. Like in Dream Village, the place where we have settled now, all the women are living. वहाँ पे सब नया हो रहा है. Like you cannot consume alcohol वहाँ पे, and that's a rule. And day before yesterday, one of my girls from there, she went to GB Road at night and she called me because I got her into therapy sessions. She took 2 therapy and she called me drunk. And she said, मुझे दारू की ज़रूरत पड़ी आपको ये बताने के लिए कि मुझे पल्लवी मैम के सेशन नहीं करने हैं. उस टाइम पे बहुत गुस्सा आया. But then the only option is, हाँ Asha, that's okay, just come back. And so yeah, I think that's what we have signed up for. So yeah, that's with me.
Do you want to add or should we pick another question?
I have nothing useful to add because you said as an entrepreneur, I'm not.
Yeah,
So
same
I'm
here.
just
That's why I was like,
overworking.
time to zip
More
myself.
questions also. So maybe any one person can respond, and then whoever wants to add, feel free to add, and then we can move to another one. Abu?
Yeah. So I think one thing that I gathered is that you do have to operate with love to bring any change. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you change someone's mind, right? Like someone's opinion about something. I know it's not through social media from your answers, but in real life also, I think, are there steps of sorts that you follow? Are there people experiencing things that changes their mind? Because I think in our work, there's a lot of people who have strong beliefs that gathered over many years, and the world changes, and I'm hoping to convince them to do something else or believe in something else. What is that process according to you or for you? What has it been?
So, I think an important value to take into account, like, when Venil was speaking, I thought of this term I learned from Biju Rao called cognitive empathy, which is to understand how the other person sees themselves and their situation, rather than impose your frame on them, that I'm looking at you this way, to understand how they are looking at the world. Now, two things about changing people's minds is that one, recognize that it is very hard, it is very slow, it takes a lot of time, it is not their fault, and it may be you who is wrong. All of these. And a frame I find useful is something that I learned from Arnold Kling's book called The Three Languages of Politics, where he was looking at this phenomenon in a US context, but it's true everywhere, that often we are speaking past each other all the time and not to each other. And in the US context, his reasoning for that was this, that if you look at the three broad political tribes, they have different first principles they are coming from, right? Your progressives will be coming from equality, your libertarians will be coming from freedom, your conservatives will be coming from tradition. So you begin at your first principle, and then completely coherently, completely cogently, you reach a stand which seems utterly logical to you, and therefore everyone who doesn't agree must be wrong. And that just makes you rigid because you cannot imagine any other way. So if I value freedom and you value equality and we are chatting, unless I recognize that your first principle is different and I cater to that, I cannot possibly convince you. So, as a freedom person, one way of my convincing you would be beginning with what you hold to be valuable and saying, okay, you want equality of this sort, but it can only be achieved through freedom of this sort, right? But you have to understand where that person is coming from. In India, these margins might really be different. We don't have those particular tribes here, but you have other tribes. So how do you talk to them, right? You might feel that there is someone who is just a bigot, there's no point talking to them. But the point is, even a person who has that one aspect to their personality will also have other aspects to their personality that you can then appeal to. So this is the other aspect of it, that people contain multitudes, and then you need to figure it out that this person is rigid for this reason. What is the best way for me to get across and talk to them? But one thing that I have learned after my impatient young years is that, like there's a saying that paradigms change one funeral at a time, right? That the world doesn't change because people change their mind. The world changes because people die. And another set of people come. Yeah. So
And that goes for bosses also.
yeah, so that goes for bosses also. So I don't want to overstate that, but I just think that it's a long, difficult process. And if you focus too much on outcome, यार मैं इतने टाइम से लिख रहा हूँ कोई सुन ही नहीं रहा है, then it won't work. You have to think of your work as your dharma. That this is what I do, And I use the word dharma in a secular sense. I'm an atheist, but you have to think of your work as your dharma. This is what I do. This is what I will keep doing. If good things happen, they will happen. Otherwise, fine. These people will die.
Do either of you want to add to that?
No, I mean, well said.
I have a question about that.
We'll take your question then. Can you be loud so that people in the back can hear you as well?
So I mean, I've seen that obviously, as you told, that the news media has changed quite a bit
since the last last how many ever years you may take your number on that. But what in my head how it plays out is that supply basically caters to demand, and ultimately what anyone wants is, like in the news media you call it TRP. Like everyone's a for-profit organization, and ultimately supply will cater to demand. And if the mass public wants to listen to a certain kind of news, for example, say you might call it that this public wants to listen to this kind of news and not say about a specific village in Bastar or some village in Bihar. They don't want to listen to that, but they want to listen to a polarizing kind of news which will really up their passions. So then how do you find that balance between, because you know that this is not going to give you views, this is not going to give you TRPs, ultimately it's not going to give you money. But this is important to be said. How do you find that balance between being a for-profit organization where you need to make that money as well, but also putting out stories which may not get those views but are important?
No, you're right. And I'm so thankful for digital media to give us that space. We have also faced those challenges. Like I personally have for my shows, I had always wanted to end my 1 hour with a good news story. There is someone, so Rajdeep Sardesai, he's a very, very dear colleague of mine, and he said he in fact started that trend of adding a good news story no matter what his views are and whoever thinks what. And yes, there is no TRP, and you know, someone told me I had started putting offbeat stories to make my show different, and someone says, no one wants to listen to good news. And you won't believe it. I saw the numbers, and people genuinely don't watch. They thrive on gore, hyper news, hyper nationalism now, sensationalism. So that is not, these are numbers, these are metrics. This is capturing the mood of, I won't say this nation, of all countries across. This reflects people's mindset. So yes, you're right. It's a challenge to put those stories out there on mainstream media. But now, mainstream media is not restricted to TV. Look what's out there. You have fabulous work in different digital platforms, and they're doing everything. Look at, I can't name, but there are so many well-known ones who are doing a phenomenal job in putting offbeat stories out there, which sometimes we don't even have the space in a 24-hour wheel. Because you have to cover this one speech, you have to cover this one speech. Elections are never ending in our country. This whole year, I was telling Amit, I've just been covering elections and being on the road. There is just so much to cover. There is cricket, there's entertainment, there's a big movie that is coming. They have come to our studios. Unko apna wo karna hai. So itna kuch hota hai. So yes, you're right. Some great work and initiatives, and there are so many NGOs doing phenomenal work. Yes, they will not find its space in mainstream media because of just the diversity and just the rush of news. But kudos, and I'm so glad that, so I do that now. I use social media, I use YouTube to put all those stories out there, which I cannot do it in my 1 hour wheel. And not just me, most of my colleagues do it. Like at least that's the endeavor. And I'm seeing that change. Yes, there are 2-3 topmost anchors who would want to just follow a certain way of delivering news, and it works for them. Again, I'm telling you, I have seen those numbers. I went to the marketing team, sales team, try out these stories, and I'm telling you, I had very, very, very encouraging bosses. Okay, fine, let her do something new. They gave me, and I tried it, and boss, I didn't get any viewership. And I fought for it so passionately because I just finished TFI and I had been brainwashed completely. Ask Venal, and there's Madhukar, my another dear friend. When I entered TFI, when I was in institute, and I had finished 13 years of journalism, and I made this sudden change in my life, and I was sitting in Pune, and everybody's talking about love, balloons. मैं कहाँ गई, क्या हो रहा है, ये हो क्या रहा है? मतलब I went to Shaheen. I said, Shaheen, this is not a real world. You're deceiving these young students. And Shaheen was like, I wanted to leave Institute. Let me be very honest. And today you can speak to Shaheen about this. I wanted to leave because it was too idealistic for me. I said, this is not the real world, बस ये empathy, love, ये वो kindness, ये सब नहीं होता है असली जिंदगी में. आप जाकर देखो जो लड़ाई लड़नी होती है ना, वो असली जिंदगी है. But I have to say, like she was saying, TFI turned out to be my biggest therapy. I've never needed a therapist. TFI was my therapist. So all the Gyan, I'm sure they're doing something really right for us to be celebrating 15 years.
Yeah, Shasha. Sorry, before that, I think there was someone in the middle. Let me cut you.
So a lot of times when I see that, when I'm not sure to a particular instance,
Can you be a little louder?
okay. My first reaction usually is anger because I see anger protects me. But a lot of times when I'm working with the community or with the students, my anger has to stop and I stop reacting because that's what I have to do. But then also, like you both said, age, I see a lot of difference that I've grown to not react more. But at the same time, I also feel that with age, I'm also seeing I'm harming myself a lot more. When I'm going back home, because I'm doing release that at that moment. And my raising my voice with myself is not with love, largely. So do you see that difference and how do you show up for yourself with love and what does that look like?
I think just be kind to yourself. And I hear you because I also react spontaneously. Thanks to my roots, I'm a Jat from Haryana. So we are born like that. Plus, I'm a journalist. So, but over the years, I tried very hard to condition myself. But I think be your authentic self because you're very, very right. It will come back. Because you can work towards it. You will mellow down, which happens, but don't lose who you are. If you react with anger, it's fine, it's okay. There's nothing wrong in it. I was told it was wrong. Or at least what the world tells you, what your peers tell you, when you get married, when you become a bahu, when you become a mother, when you become someone's wife, when you become someone's thing, you are perceived in very different ways and there are expectations. So whoever says there are no expectations, there are expectations. For a woman to conform at every stage of your life, my unsolicited advice, I'm not very young and I'm not very old, but be your authentic self. Because that is your only thing that will protect you. Nothing else, no one else. It's you who will protect yourself.
I want to add to that and say that if you lose your anger, you lose your humanity, right? The message here is not that you don't feel angry. All these emotions are natural to us. We will feel love, we will feel anger, we will feel all of these things. These are important. Nurture them. They are part of your deep engagement with the world. But the thing is, when you behave with the world, then you behave differently. Then you don't have to behave with anger. Then you can either be strategic about it, or you can just say that, okay, the person that I am, I never behave with anger or whatever. That's in your behavior. That is what you choose to do. But in your natural reactions, if you never feel angry, then how are you even human? Then you'll become a jaded person who will stop responding to the world. So.
Ranji, do you have as well? How do you
Yeah, I
process
think
that?
it's a journey. It's a journey from instantly you shout because you're passionate about something and you really want to make it happen. And if they're not listening, प्यार से तो आपको बोलना पड़ता है ना मतलब ऐसा वो आता ही है आप में but I think it's a journey because every time I have seen that in my life I've seen that when I've shouted I have created a bigger problem for me so there has been instances where I have been detected with depression where I had to when doctors told me to get onto medications where things so because like the world says कि हर बार तो गुस्सा नहीं दिखा सकते हो you can't like when you are into social sector you have to mellow down and then you tell yourself boss I have to mellow down but I'm not able to and then you force yourself to do that so emotion तो रहेगा ही आपके अंदर right but then eventually you also find your own space so like for me right now Thursdays 12 to 1 is my time that is my time with the person whom I love most she's my therapist also But मेरे को मैं literally I look up for that day, I look up for that hour. So that has been my safe space. And I think eventually आपको पता चल जाता है कि instant शायद react ना करूँ, एक हफ्ता wait कर लेती हूँ, let me speak to Neetu. कभी कभी instant भी react हो जाता है, and then about that reaction I speak to my therapist कि I reacted and I'm feeling this, and then but so these are all stages. It's never कि हम लोग पहले दिन काम करने, like पहले दिन आप कहीं बच्चों के साथ मतलब you're gathering with children and you're saying, oh, I'm all love and now no other emotion will flow through me. All the emotions will flow through it. It's a movie, film है, सारे emotions जरूरी है, नहीं तो flop हो जाएंगे.
Just to add, I think if you want to release it with that person, with your children, you have to release it somewhere else, whether it's meditation, whether it's therapy, whether it's talking to a friend, whether it's listening to music, going for a run. I think all of us need to just develop what is that system to get that emotion released as well. Shashank?
Just a reflection and thoughts on that. I work in the field of politics. One of my learnings over the years has been that many times we all believe politics is for the people, by the people. Right? But many times, what the people stand for is completely contrarian to what I believe in. Right? And I find myself saying इनको ये डिजर्व करता है छोड़, right? बाहर भी जाने दो, right? How do you, right, sometimes this conflict between what I think, what are being taught in spaces like Teach for India, like love, equality, justice, fraternity, all these things are important. But if my electorate believes otherwise, as they show in their vote, then am I wrong? Should I change myself and actually enjoy the fruits of power, or actually continue struggling like I've been doing for 14 years now, right? Just so this is a big dilemma. I hope I kind of made myself clear. Right? So your thoughts on that? That's one of the things I was thinking, and I'm sure.
Yeah, I can go first. I mean, I'd say two things. One is that if you think of politics as supply responding to demand, you have two options. One is you see the demand and you be the supply, right? In which case, your principles don't matter. It is a will to power that matters. If you're going to succeed, you have to be the supply for that demand. That's one approach to that. The second approach to that is change the demand. And I'm not sure politicians can do that. Right? When you say that it can, that is only a process that happens over a lot of time from the bottom up, right? And I am much more oriented towards thinking that agar desh badalna hai, to bottom up tarike mein hoga, you got to change the demand. As long as the demand is what it is, the supply will spring up. The second thing I'd like to add to that, and I'm just speculating here and thinking aloud, is that possibly the demand may not be what we think it is exactly. People contain multitudes, people want many different things, right? And how do you reconcile all of that? There might be a group of people who are like, we want Hindu Rashtra, and then you are giving up because you don't believe in that. But they might also want a good economy, they might also want jobs for their kids, they might also want things on other margins. So then in a strategic way, you have to kind of figure out, how can I cater to those aspects? But ultimately, if your feeling is that the kind of person I am, the kind of principles I have, I can't succeed in this political marketplace, then rather than leave it entirely, think about its supply and demand. How do you change the demand? It's a bottom-up thing, and it'll it'll have to happen through culture and not through politics. That's my. Yeah, of course. But it happens. I mean, but it happens over decades. Look at what Gandhi did. Look at how that movement went. It takes time, and also there's that saying that a week is a long time in politics, right? There's that famous saying. You never actually know what can happen in any direction. When the 2001 attacks happened, if someone told you that America's next president will be a guy whose name rhymes with Osama and his middle name is Hussein, you would not have believed it. But it happened. At that point, if somebody told you that mad businessman Trump is going to be president twice, you would not have believed it, but it happened. So the thing is that It's like someone said, for years nothing happens, and then in a week decades take place. So you also then have to stick to it and prepare for that change to happen. But when and how it happens, I don't think anyone can predict, because most of the future is unknown unknowns.
It's a tough one. Politics is a beast to take on. I was speaking to Madhukar also. I have spent so much time in villages covering the assembly elections and then, of course, Lok Sabha polls. And now, Shashank, the voter has become very informed and empowered. So you have that challenge also to look at. Because पहले क्या होता था कि नेता आ जाते थे, जो भी बोल देते थे, गांव वाले believe भी कर लेते. Now the voter is very silent and is not talking and is very empowered and knows exactly. But I have also sat in villages like Lakhimpur, Khedi mein thi, and I was in Mirzapur for these elections, and in Odisha. Chalo, I'll give you one example. In Odisha, I was there. I spent hours and days and with the guilt of leaving my children and everything. The people there were like, makan nahi hai, ye nahi hai, wo nahi hai, ye nahi hai, this, that. And they still voted for the person.
Which has got nothing to do with
Which has got nothing to do. So, आप एक तरफ से सोच रहे हो कि मेरे जो beliefs है बिल्कुल ये कि हमें इनको jobs देना चाहिए, हमें रोटी देना चाहिए, मकान देना चाहिए, ये देना चाहिए, ये लोग बहुत खुश हैं, कई लोग तो बहुत content है, जो है वहाँ पर है. And this is a reality that, I mean, Mumbai and Delhi is not India. They think कि boss हमें इतना खाते में आ रहा है, इतना खा रहा है, we are very happy. It is there. So, I mean, unsolicited advice, I would second with Amit. I think you need to be strategic. I don't mean compromising your values, but yes, it will take a long time. But I think, what do you want by the end of it? And I might be sounding very direct and crass, but boss, अगर MP बनना है, MLA बनना है, तो या तो तुम या प्रशांत किशोर को देख लो अब, वो क्या कर रहे हैं अभी. He has gone on his own, this thing, he started it. So it really comes down to what you want and what are you hoping for yourself and your political careers. Without compromising your values, be strategic and go with the flow and probably win and then come back to your core values and drive that change which you had embarked on.
I'd love, Gitanjali, for you to weigh in as well. I'm sure, like on the ground, you're trying to probably say, okay, hey, education, etc. But somebody will be like, no, actually, I'm happy here. I don't.
Yeah, and it's true. They are very happy. Yeah. You are going there to drive change, but they're like, आप अपने जगह बैठो, हम खुश हैं. हम खुश हैं. Genuinely, they're happy.
No, not on a political, because that's like huge scale what you're talking about. But if you talk about this, then I mean, there are 4,000 women in GB Road and we have only 25 women in Dream Village. So बाकी सभी औरतों को वो जिंदगी उनको पता है. So we always say that it's a Stockholm syndrome also, कि उनको आदत पड़ गई है उस abuse की, उनको चाहिए वो abuse और उनको डर लगता है एक safe environment में. But जब आप उनके साथ काम कर उनको निकाल कर ले आते हो safe environment में, then they realize where were they. और वहाँ उनको वापस नहीं जाना है. But वहाँ से निकालना, it's a journey. And that requires strategy and that requires lot of time, which I think political उसमें नहीं होता उतना समय. It's all timeline.
Shashank, can I?
just one last word.
There were a few other hands, sorry. Thanks, Shashank. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Can you be really loud so that they can hear you?
I will try. My question is actually firstly, I've been a huge fan of serial and series, that's what really made it. So I belong to the media field. I'm currently working in film and television. And following your podcast over the years, I've realized that even the way which you've been conducting your conversations, like I see that you always try to pick people who have opposing views to mix. Like in your recent podcast, and the way you conduct yourself in those situations is something that I sort of learn a lot from. Because there are a lot of times, like just the recent podcast where there's a veg non-veg discussion and the way you sort of navigated it, it's very admirable. I'm currently at a section where I'm trying to bring podcasting to children. I want to know from your experience, what are certain skills, could be soft skills, hard skills, that you have seen grow in yourself, which could sort of make a vision map for the kind of work I would want to aim for a child and working with the baby.
Thanks for the kind words. I think one of the truly important life lessons I learned through podcasting, kind of by accident, through the kind of podcast I do, is learning how to listen. Right? Because, like, I do 8-hour, 10-hour, 12-hour conversations. It's like oral histories almost. And if you're doing a conversation that is half an hour or whatever, you can be pretty shallow. You've read the book, but you can be pretty shallow. You don't have to go deep. If you're doing these longer conversations, you have to listen to understand and not listen to respond, in the words of Stephen Covey. Most of us, we are always in a mode when we are in a conversation that we are thinking of what we are going to say next. That I will say this and I will show I'm so smart. Or no, I believe this and I'm going to say that. And I think a key skill that I learned through doing these long format conversations is just getting ego out of the window. I'm just sitting there, I'm going to listen to you. It is a core quality of mine that I never interrupt, which is something that I learned through this. And I think when you're teaching podcasting to children, this is super important because children are always kind of, bubbling with excitement. They want to say what they want to say. And I think thinking of, this as an important value in podcasting can even help them in life because it then brings that therav, that you're stepping back and you're thinking. Like one good exercise in any conversation with someone you don't agree with is to steel man their position, right? Straw man, you would all know. Straw man is when you attack something the other person didn't really say. You caricature their position. Steel man is that you restate their position so well that even they are thinking, ki, wow, I should have said it like this. And then you argue with it, right? So they know that you understand what they are trying to say. And then once you build that mutual respect, then anything goes. So I would say that those are the values that I look for when I think of the larger life lessons that I've learned through podcasting. It is about listening and respecting the other person. And if you can get them into that space, like if you're getting kids to podcast, just put a hard rule, no interruption. It's so difficult, especially if they're boys. These guys will know that I'm sure they've been on many panels. Women are getting interrupted all the time. Like one trick of mine is if there's a mixed panel, I'll actually calculate how much each gender is allowed to say till the interruption comes. So guys are interrupting women all the time. And I'm like, speak to the young boys and cut it at the source.
I just cut the audio now.
Yeah.
No, the PCR knows the cues. I'm just like, I'm giving away my career.
Yeah.
It's just, I cannot handle it anymore.
I have an episode on podcasting on my YouTube show. Episode 49 of Everything is called The Art of Podcasting. So I used to teach a podcasting course. Then I thought I don't want to teach it. I just put all the gyan there. So you can look at that for...
I think we all need to get into podcasting to learn the art of listening. No one listens. Yeah.
I think we have got time for one last question. We can take one. Oh, loudly.
My question is particularly for the problem.
Gitanjali. Yeah. Very soft. Without. Teach us.
Okay.
Raise your voice.
With firmness. Impact.
Yeah. So, an individual can often create only so much impact, and that's why you need to add more staff members, more volunteers in your movements to create more impact. In broader the environment and the work is as such, where you will always be worried about the safety of the members who are associated with you because everyone is carrying vaccine and anything could happen. But at the same time, you want the impact to happen as well. So, in such a scenario, how do you strike a balance becoming a leader caring for your own people and ensuring that we are also helping out the people who we actually started the movement?
Actually, when I started initially, I was very concerned about everybody's security. I used to feel that it's my responsibility that if somebody is going on GB Road, then and if something happens to them. And then one of my volunteers got attacked by a druggie. But he ran. He could just escape. अभी वो आने वाला था उसके ऊपर, but उसका उसने bag छीना. He was actually wanted to snatch his bag. and he ran. And that day I realized I was not there, right? And his name is Sarthak, the volunteer's name. And like सार्थक ने खुद के लिए ही लड़ा, मैं तो नहीं पहुंच पाई उस सिचुएशन में. So अगर मैं if I stay with this worry that I have to take care of everything and everyone, then मैं तो बहुत जल्दी I myself will not be able to continue on this journey. So now every time somebody comes, yes, at the back of our mind, so we do everything whatever we can. We don't send the person all alone in the brothel in the very beginning. The whole team accompanies them. But 3-4 महीने के बाद when we sit with that person and say, अगर अब you're confident, now you're on your own because you have come for this job. Right? You knew you were entering into a place which could be dangerous for you, and you signed up for that. So एक टाइम के बाद अगर हम सबकी जिम्मेदारी मुझे लगता है अगर मेरे कंधे पे आ गई तो फिर मैं तो I mean I'll be on the bed then for the rest of my life. So I think that is eventually when you're on that journey, you want to make sure that everything is protected. But with years, you realize that everybody is on their own journeys, and you can just do this much. उसके beyond तो for me universe plays a very important role. मुझे लगता है हर बार every time I come back safe from GB Road, especially from our night walks, I really feel grateful कि वापस आ गई. Wow. And that's what we feel grateful for all the team members also. So yeah.
You know, I just want to add very quickly here. When I left Institute being all idealistic to change the world in 2011, and I had told TFI that put me in a school which is close to my house. And TFI being TFI put me in a school in the middle of nowhere. And the first day, I still remember Sheila and Shrutika were there and they were like, Avantika, come on. And I was very cynical. I was very doubtful about it. And I've reached Sangam Vihar, which I didn't know existed also. And Sangam Vihar is a bustling, crazy locality of Delhi. Like, it's crazy. And I reached there and I'm trying to look for my school and there were these two cops. Like, Madam ji, kahan jana hai? And so I said, wo kahan hai? Ye gali wali wali and all that. मैडम जी आप यहाँ कहाँ फंस गए हो यहाँ पर तो हर 2 सेकंड रेप वेप सब हो जाता है and I तो was like okay I'm dead I don't know what have I got myself into and with such conviction these cops told me that you don't know what this place is. 2 years, me and my 2 co-fellows, 2 years, not a single person touched us, harassed us. In fact, everybody in that whole lane, it's a crazy. If you ever come to Delhi, I'll show you Sangam Vihar. Didi ji aa gayi, Didi ji aa gayi, Didi ji aa gayi, Didi ji aa gayi, Didi ji aa gayi. So, I mean, as she rightly said, you have to, you know, do that kind of work to earn that kind of respect, and no one will touch you then.
I told we have time for one more question, so go for it.
Hi. So I just want to know your thoughts after listening to your great talk and following your podcast. You started with saying that vocal majority and silent minority, right? So is that the equilibrium that's gonna be there, or is there a way that we can like shift that balance? You know, can we have vocal majority? I mean, but I don't mean again like social media kind of vocal minority. Having great podcasts and like great media organizations. Great work, having that voice reach the majority. Like, how do we do that? Like, what are some of the ideas? Or how do we do that with children? We are doing it.
I think firstly on social media itself, as it stands today, it is impossible. Because of the way the incentives are aligned, there is a drive to the extreme and the silent majority in which I would consider myself. We won't bother. Kai ko jhanjat lene ka. You say something nuanced and everyone's going to jump on you. So I don't think that's going to change on social media itself. The other thing to note is that, you know, earlier when she was asked the question, when you asked her the question about the TRPs and all of that, and something I've been thinking about deeply for a while is the difference between vast engagement, which is shallow, and more focused engagement, which is deep. Right? Like I used to say once upon a time that I'd rather have 100,000 people listen to my podcast than 10 million people watch me on YouTube. Because the YouTubers will watch me for an average of 25 seconds, whereas my average session time now is around 40 minutes, which is, you know, pretty incredible. So, which all long form podcasts have, by the way, it's a medium. So so my numbers might be much lower, but the engagement is way deeper, right? As all the listeners here would know. I mean, you've shown up here, so the engagement is way deeper. So the thing is, I wouldn't give up hope, therefore, because the people who are engaging with the deep ideas, they care about it deeply. They will invest their lives and their money in it, and they'll whatever. Whereas all the shallow people who are watching all the shallow, hate-filled content, it's not going deep into their souls in a sense. So that gives me a little bit of hope that all the noise that you hear is misleading. That A, the people who engage deeply, that deep engagement means much more. And B, people are just fundamentally different. And I think you're seeing a shift away from that already. But certain platforms, the way they are designed, the way the algos worked, you can't change it on those. You're not going to get a Twitter which is reasonable voices having great dialogue. Not going to happen. But yeah. You have something?
Yeah, I think, and long formatted podcasts have a very niche audience, but they're enormously popular, especially in the US. I was in the US for quite some time. I got hooked to it. In India, in all honesty, it's just only starting. Everyone is talking about podcasts. And someone told me also, Avantika, stop all this. Why are you working? Start your own podcast. Podcast, I feel, is a very nuanced thing. I have enormous respect for people like Amit who really get into the skin of things because there is an audience. But is it as big an audience to make the impact that you're expecting or you're desiring? Probably not, because there is a lot of other podcasts that want to kind of capture, and it's very frivolous. It's not as deep as you would expect it to. But again, it comes to you. What do you want? Like, do you want an instant impact? Then long formatted podcasts is not your way to go. And you will have to look at some other option to make that impact. कभी कभी होता है ना कि मुझे अपनी स्टोरी दिखानी है भाई, मतलब है नहीं टाइम, इसको दिखाना ही होता है. आप 8-8 घंटे नहीं बैठ सकते हो उसके ऊपर, नहीं कोई रिएक्ट करेगा. So it really depends on what you are looking at and what do you desire. Yeah.
With that, thank you so much, everyone in the audience, and especially the three of you. I think this was just such a great way to start this day. So much insight, so much inspiration. I know that I'm taking away, and I'm sure everyone in the group as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you to Venil also for being so awesome.
Yeah, really.
You really made it happen.
Really, thank you.
A small appreciation for you and us. So Beryl is a 29er. 29er. I am a 19er. So a little something for you. Thank you so much for holding this space so beautifully. Thank you so much. We end the space. We'll start the next space here at 12. If you have registered for this, you can stay back. If not, please.
If not, get out.
Exactly that. With love.